They call Manos the Hands of Fate the worst movie ever made. Get away out of that. That gives it too much credit. Calling it a movie implies it functions like one that it has a beginning, a middle, an end, and pictures that move in a way that doesn't induce seasickness. It doesn't. It's not a film. It's a hostage situation captured on celluloid. It's a crime scene where the victim was the art of cinema itself. Come here to me, and I'll tell ye the real story of the most arrogant, misguided, and disastrous production in the history of the medium. The year was 1966. The golden age of Hollywood was in the ground, and the studio system was gasping its last breath. The old gods were dying, and in the vacuum, a new breed of filmmaker was emerging. Some were geniuses, like the new Hollywood brats, and some were Harold P. Warren. Warren wasn't a visionary. He wasn't a rebel. He was a fertilizer salesman from El Paso, Texas. He spent his days peddling manure, and if you look at the script he wrote, you'll realise he didn't stray far from his area of expertise. The story of this disaster starts with a bet. Not a vision, not a dream, but a gamble born of pure, unadulterated hubris. Warren was sitting in a coffee shop with Sterling Siliphant. Now, keep in mind, Siliphant wasn't a nobody. He was an Oscar-winning screenwriter. He wrote in the heat of the night. He knew how to craft a story. He knew the structure, the pacing, the agonising work that goes into making a script sing. Warren, on the other hand, had the absolute notions. He looked this professional writer in the eye and told him that making a horror movie was the easiest thing in the world. He said, "I bet I can make a horror film." He didn't know a lens aperture from a hole in the ground, but he had the confidence of a man who's never been told no in his life. Siliphant, probably thinking he was dealing with a harmless Egypt, took the bet, and thus the gates of hell were opened. Warren's plan was to shoot the entire film on a budget of $19,000. To put that in perspective, Hollywood studios spent more than that on lunch for the extras. But Warren, the gombean that he was, thought he could outsmart the system. He decided to film in El Paso, using locals, theatre actors, and anyone who couldn't run away fast enough. He wrote the script himself, presumably on the back of a fertilizer receipt. And the casting process, pure devilment. He cast himself as the lead, Michael, because when ye are a narcissist with a camera, why would ye let anyone else be the hero? For the rest of the cast, he went to the local community theatre. He found Tom Neiman to play the master, the villain of the piece. Neiman was an artist, which explains why the props look like they were made in a kindergarten art class, but we'll get to that. The real tragedy, however, lies in the payment plan. Warren gathered these hopefuls, these dreamers, and told them that nobody would be paid a salary, not a single cent. Instead, they would all receive a share of the profits. It was a slave contract. He was selling them a dream that he had already mortgaged to his own ego. The only individuals on that set who walked away with anything tangible were the child actress Jackie Neyman, who was given a bicycle, and the dog, who received a large bag of dog food. Looking back, the dog had the best contract. He was the only one who got paid up front. Now, let's talk about the equipment, because this is where the production goes from a bad idea to an absolute hames. Warren didn't rent a professional 35mm camera. He didn't even rent a standard 16mm camera that could record sound. No, he got his hands on a Bell & Howell 16mm combat camera.
What?
This was a camera designed for newsreels or home movies, not feature films. It was a wind-up camera. Stop the lights. Think about what that means. You wind it up, you point it, and it runs. But it only runs for 32 seconds. 32 seconds. That was the maximum length of any shot in the entire movie. Imagine trying to film a dramatic scene, an argument, or a chase when you have to cut every 30 seconds to crank the handle. It destroyed any possibility of rhythm. The actors would just be getting into the emotion of the scene, and then click, whir, silence, cut, wind it up, start again.
Are you serious?
It turned the acting into a series of disjointed, panicked bursts. You can see it in their eyes. They're rushing their lines, terrified the camera's going to die before they finish the sentence. It gives the entire film a frantic, stilted energy that feels less like a movie and more like a fever dream. But wait, it gets worse. This camera was noisy. It buzzed like a hive of angry bees. And, crucially, it could not record sound. The entire movie, every line of dialogue, every scream, every footstep was shot silent. This meant that after the filming was done, Warren and a handful of others had to go into a recording studio and dub the entire film themselves. And because Warren was cheap, he didn't hire the actors back to dub their own voices. That would cost money. Instead, he and 2 or 3 other people dubbed almost all the voices. The result is auditory hallucination. You have a little girl opening her mouth, and the voice coming out sounds like a middle-aged woman pinching her nose. You have the police officer speaking, and they sound exactly like the hero, because they were all voiced by Warren.
You think we're doing something wrong?
No, you got it all wrong. Love should be musty and hurtful.
Whatever it is you're not doing, don't do it somewhere else.
The synchronization is an absolute dog's dinner. Lips move, and no sound comes out.
Why don't you guys leave us alone?
Will I have a bad rep?
Come on now, no wisecrack.
Then, 3 seconds later, a line of dialogue floats in from the ether. Characters interrupt each other because the dubbing actors weren't looking at the screen. It creates a disconnect that makes the viewer feel like they are losing their mind. It's not just bad audio, it's psychological warfare. And then we must speak of Togo. Poor, tragic Togo, played by John Reynolds. Togo is the caretaker of the lodge where the family becomes trapped. The script described him as a satyr, a mythical creature, half man, half goat. Now, a real studio would have used prosthetics, makeup, professional effects. Warren used wire coat hangers. Reynolds built a rig out of metal piping and wire to wear under his oversized trousers to make his knees look bent backward like a goat. The problem? He put the rig on backward. Or perhaps the design was just flawed from the start. But the result was that the metal dug into his flesh with every single step. The man was in constant, agonizing physical pain. When you watch the movie, look at Togo's walk. That strange, stumbling, twitchy gait. That isn't a bold acting choice. That is a man trying not to scream. To cope with the pain of the metal grinding into his kneecaps, Reynolds was reportedly self-medicating heavily. He was on painkillers, and legend has it, a significant amount of LSD. He was away with the ferries for the entire shoot. Look at his eyes. They roll back in his head. He stares at nothing. He mumbles his lines with a slur that defies description. He is a man lost in a chemical fog, trapped in a physical torture device, being directed by a fertilizer salesman in the middle of the desert. It is the definition of acting the maggot. But it's not his fault. He was a victim. The filming location was another layer of hell. They shot at a ranch in the scorching Texas heat. The equipment was melting. The actors were sweating through their costumes. And the lighting? What lighting? They didn't have professional lights. For the night scenes, they often just shot day for night, using a filter to make it look dark. Except, half the time, they forgot the filter, or it didn't work. So you have scenes where the characters are saying, "It's getting dark, we must stay here," and the sun is blazing in the sky. It's pure egoistry. And the scenes that were actually shot at night, they used the car headlights and a few handheld lamps. The result is that the actors are surrounded by pitch blackness, floating heads in a void. And the moths. Oh, the moths. Because they had the only bright lights for miles in the desert, every insect in Texas descended on the set. In several dramatic scenes, you can see swarms of moths bouncing off the actors' faces. They are landing on the lens. They are crawling on the costumes. And Warren? He didn't cut. He just kept rolling. We only have 32 seconds. Ignore the bugs. It adds a layer of grime and filth to the movie that you can almost feel on your skin. The plot itself is a masterclass in how to waste time. The movie is only about 70 minutes long, but it feels like it lasts 3 weeks. To pad the runtime, Warren included endless driving scenes. I mean endless. We watch the family car drive past a field, then a sign, then another field, then a cow, then the same field again. It goes on and on. It's padding, plain and simple. The camera just sits in the back seat, filming the back of the actors' heads as they drive in silence. It's mesmerizingly boring. It's a bold avant-garde statement, life is a highway, and it's really, really dull. When they finally arrive at the lodge, we meet the master, Tom Neiman, looking like he's wearing a bathrobe he stole from a cult leader's yard sale. The robe has big red hands sewn onto it. It looks ridiculous. He has a harem of wives who spend the entire movie standing around in nightgowns looking bored. There is a scene where the wives fight. It is supposed to be a vicious battle for the master's favour. Instead, it looks like a slow-motion wrestling match at a slumber party. They roll around in the dirt hair pool and softly shoving each other. It's not violent. It's embarrassing. And because of the 32-second limit, the fight is edited with a machete. 1 second they are standing, the next they are on the ground, then they are standing again. Continuity was a concept Warren evidently didn't believe in. There is a subplot involving 2 teenagers in a convertible who are making out. They are pulled over by the police leave, they start making out again. This happens 3 or 4 times. These characters never meet the main family. They have no impact on the plot. They exist solely because Warren needed to fill more time and probably had 2 friends who wanted to be in a movie. The police officers, by the way, are also voiced by Warren, so they sound exactly like the guy in the convertible. It's a hall of mirrors of incompetence. The climax of the film, if you can call it that, involves the master deciding to sacrifice the child, but then he doesn't. Or maybe he does. The editing is so confused it's hard to tell. Togo is killed, or perhaps just hypnotised to death. He gets his hand burned off, runs into the darkness, and vanishes. It's a narrative collapse. The script just gives up. But the real horror story happened off screen. The premiere, 1966, the Capri Theatre in El Paso. Warren was convinced he had a hit. He had the absolute notions of a man who has lost touch with reality. He rented a limousine to transport the cast. He hired searchlights to sweep the sky, mimicking a Hollywood opening. He invited the mayor, the sheriff, the local press. It was a black tie affair. The cast, poor souls, were excited. They brought their families. They thought this was their big break. They sat in the front row, beaming. Then the projector started. The first few minutes were met with silence. Then, confusion. The audience saw the grainy, washed-out footage. They heard the buzzing audio. They heard the mismatched dubbing. And then, the laughter began. It started as a ripple, a chuckle here, a snort there. But as the film dragged on, as Togo twitched and the driving scenes stretched into infinity, the ripple became a wave. The audience wasn't laughing with the film, they were laughing at it. They were jeering at the screen. "Do something!" someone yelled during a driving scene. "Fix your knees!" someone shouted at Togo. The cast was mortified. They sank into their seats. The little girl, Jackie, began to cry. The master, Tom Neiman, wished the floor would open up and swallow him. It was a public humiliation. Warren, realising his masterpiece was a turkey, began sweating bullets. He tried to laugh along, pretending it was supposed to be a comedy, but nobody was buying it. It wasn't a comedy, it was a disaster. By the time the credits rolled, Warren had practically sprinted out the back door to avoid the angry mob of bored patrons. He had bet his reputation, and he had lost. The reviews were savage. The few critics who bothered to write about it didn't just pan it, they tried to bury it. They called it an insult to intelligence. They called it the worst thing to ever come out of Texas, and that's saying something. The film played for a brief run at the Capri and a few drive-ins, and then it vanished. It was thrown onto the scrap heap of cinema, destined to be forgotten. Warren went back to selling fertilizer. He never directed another film. He spent the rest of his life trying to live down the fact that he was the man who made Manos. But the story has a darker note. John Reynolds, the man who played Togo, the man who suffered through the pain of the backward leg braces and the scorching heat, never saw the film. He struggled with severe depression and drug addiction. He committed suicide just a month before the premiere. He was 25 years old. It casts a long, grim shadow over the movie. When we laugh at Togo today, we are laughing at a man who was literally destroying himself for a role in a movie that nobody cared about. It's a tragedy wrapped in a farce. So, why are we still talking about this absolute hames of a film 50 years later? Because, as my old fella used to say, You can't keep a good disaster down. In the 90s, the tape was discovered by the crew of Mystery Science Theatre 3000. They showcased it, riffed on it, and broadcast it to the world. And suddenly, Manos was famous. It became a cult classic.
What?
People started hosting viewing parties. They dressed up as Togo for Halloween. The surviving cast members, who had spent decades hiding their involvement, were suddenly celebrities. Jackie Neyman, the little girl with the bicycle, wrote a book about it. The master returned to sign autographs. But let's not get sentimental. The lesson of Manos, the Hands of Fate, is not one of triumph. It is a lesson in the dangers of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It is a testament to the arrogance of the amateur. Warren looked at the dying studio system of the 1960s and thought, I can do that better. He couldn't. He proved that filmmaking is a discipline. It requires a respect for the craft that Warren simply didn't possess. He treated cinema like a sales pitch, flashy, loud, and ultimately empty. The film stands today as a monument to pure egoistry. It is the gold standard of bad movies. Other bad movies might be boring, or offensive, or incompetent, but Manos is special. It is a perfect storm of every single thing that can go wrong in a production going wrong at the same time. It is a fractal of failure. Zoom in on any part of the movie, the acting, the lighting, the sound, the props, and you will find a new level of incompetence. It reminds us that the barrier to entry in art exists for a reason. Not to keep people out, but to ensure that the people who get in have at least read the manual. Warren didn't read the manual. He didn't even read the box the camera came in. He just wound it up and let it rip. And in doing so, he created something unforgettable. He created a nightmare. So, was it worth it? For Warren? Probably not. He died knowing he was a joke in the film community. For the cast? Maybe now, with the convention circuit fees, but certainly not then. For the audience? Absolutely. Because sometimes you need to see the absolute bottom of the barrel to appreciate the top. You need to see Manos to understand why Citizen Kane is good. You need to see the darkness to appreciate the light. Or, in this case, you need to see the moths to appreciate a clear lens. The Hands of Fate. A bet made in a coffee shop that turned into a legacy of failure. It's the Fertilizer Salesman's gift to the world. A steaming pile of, well, you know. Right, I'm off. Slauncher.